social forum, and you know, every once I put a social forum out there, there is somebody out there to say, oh my God, you know, what is this you're putting there? You know, like for example, I had one email said, so all these pictures you have out there, so it shows that only those people, you know, the black men are in jail and nobody else is, you know, and I had to kind of explain this is mass incarceration, is not just any incarceration, you know, and the mass incarceration is actually focused up on black and brown men, not women, and it focuses on poor black and Mexicans, not middle class. So I am not prejudiced, but anyway, every time I get this email, I said, should I do another social forum? And then I get another email saying, oh, Roya, you're doing a fantastic job. You know, like, thank you for being on top of all these things and doing this monthly, and just kind of give me hope that I'm doing the right thing. So, before I introduce Whitney, actually, I'm going to let Whitney to introduce herself and her involvement with communities of mass incarcerations, you know. But before I do that, I want to tell you what is going to be our next forum. It's going to be on 1st of February, and it is workers' cooperative teaching. So imagine an economy for the rest of us. That's what the title is. So our mind have been so colonized by the paradigm of industrial age capitalism that we've lost the ability to imagine other ways of organizing an economy. And this is Marjorie Kelly, Owning Our Future, did that. And this presentation will invite the participant to imagine a new economic model. The workers-owned cooperative were created in the 18th century to enable working people to acquire assets and to determine their own destiny. Worker-owned cooperatives moved the economy from Wall Street to Main Street, where it belongs. And I just wanted to let you know that I am involved with the project Cooperative Community Schools. We're going to be the first teacher cooperative in the state of Colorado. The teachers are part of that cooperative. The teachers are running the schools and teaching, and you know, so they work and they own and they run the schools. And we don't have, you know, administrators, we don't have principals, we don't have assistant principal. They have just teachers, parents, and the students, the ones who are mostly involved, you know, to decide what the education should look like. You know, we applied for Aurora Public Schools to open up our charter schools over there, and we chose there because the poverty level is very high over there, and the minority level is, actually Aurora is the only city in the state of Colorado which has 55% minorities. And so we applied there and everything looked good, and Aurora denied us. But then we applied for a grant through the state. We got $600,000 awarded to us to start this school. It's wonderful, but we cannot use it. They're going to take it back on April 1st because Aurora denied us. And we feel that most of the denial was because what if the teachers own school, the teacher-run schools become a successful model? We are not going to need all these administrations. We are not going to need all of these districts, you know, and all these overhead money that we are spending. So that is why I felt that we were denied, you know, and We are going to go again on mid-April to apply, and hopefully, and we are going for Adams 12 as well, and we are going for state. We prefer to stay with the state so we can keep starting a school all over the state of Colorado, because we feel like this is a movement and our school is just a model to show what if, you know, they have used everything on planet Earth to reform education, you know, nothing has worked, okay? What do you do with the system that it doesn't collapse and doesn't reform? You have to create new. And our creating new model is teachers be the center of decision making. And if you want teachers to be, you know, teachers to be fruitful, you know, teachers to contribute to the education of students, you have to make them accountable. And if the only way you can make them accountable is to count their decisions in this part of decision making for education. You cannot just keep ordering them, giving them stuff to do, and thinking that it's going to get done, and nothing gets done, and that's why we have this state of education as we have. Anyway, this is my little information about the project that I love most that I'm working on, and we're going to be losing this $600,000 by April 1 unless miracle happens and Aurora decides to authorize us, and if not, they're going to give this money to somebody else. And the good part about it is this was I have written grants before, like $1,000 to $100, but never $600,000. But now I know I can write a grant too. That's the good part about it. You know, jack of all trades, mastering none. But anyhow, with this I'm gonna end, and I let Whitney to talk about communities of mass incarceration. Okay.
Are you okay with me?
Do I really need this? Can you guys hear me? Yeah.
I do. It's nice.
You do? Okay. So before I start talking about what it is that we do as an organization, I kind of want to get a feel for how many folks are actually familiar with the idea of mass incarceration itself. So show of hands, familiar. Okay, now show of hands of folks who are willing to like tell the rest of the group what mass incarceration is. Darren.
My interpretation of it is it is a concerted effort by law enforcement to fill up the jails with largely people of color on victimless criminals who are accused of a victimless crime such as drug use, and it's the reason why we have 25% of the world's prison population with 5% of the global population, pretty much.
Yeah, thank you. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? I know a very learned group here. So.
You know, the privatization of prison, you know, it's like a hotel or a motel. They have to keep their beds filled, and if it's not, they're not going to make money. So they create all these petty, you know, like crimes, and get people, you know, like I heard like in Georgia or Alabama, somebody for carrying a bag of weed was like about 5 to 10 years, you know, something ridiculous. So their beds are filled, you know, so.
Yeah, so certainly the private prison industry has grown as a result of this, yeah.
I have a question. Does it, with regard to mass incarceration, how does it get communicated down to the civil level to actually, you know, target and, you know, create this? Is it just naturally a part of, you know, the whole biases of marginalization, or is it something, a directive that's coming from somewhere?
Well, I think that there would be, we would know about it if there was some kind of directive. Otherwise, there's a whistleblower that's waiting to let it out. But I think what's really happened is that if you look at, so The New Jim Crow is an amazing book. It's the reason why I started with this work. If you haven't read it, I would read it, and that actually might answer some of those questions. But if you look how the prison industry in this country and the prison population actually exploded, it started about in the 70s, and it started with also shifts in residency where people were living based on race. So gentrification, white flight was very much a part of this. The war on poverty, the war on drugs kind of grew out of this. And white supremacy has always existed in this country, and so that didn't need to get communicated down to, you know, local police. That was already part of our culture, so embedded that was just.
Well, there was the CIA what is it?
The COINTELPRO.
Right, COINTELPRO.
Right, and that targeted activists, but it's also, it's much bigger than just activists, and it's also much bigger than just victimless crimes. Mass incarceration really refers to the explosion of the prison population and the explosion of the people that are under this supervision of the U.S. criminal justice system, be it state, city level, or federal level.
Right.
So that's basically what we're working with. And so the organization that I work with is an all-volunteer organization. We would be nonprofit if we had legal status. We currently don't, which means that we have perfect freedom to do whatever we want. And no money. But it's called Communities United Against Mass Incarceration. So the acronym is CUAMI, CUAMI. So I'm going to refer to that. So if I say CUAMI, I'm not talking about a person named Kwame who was born on Saturday. We were born on a Saturday, but anyway, so basically the way that CUAMI kind of envisions mass incarceration, the way that we see it, is that if you look at the population of people that are under the supervision of the criminal justice system, people are there for crimes of poverty or fear of poverty. They're there for mental health related issues that landed them in jail or in prison. They're there, or there's a huge chunk of people that are behind bars because we have a really racist immigration system. There's a lot of people that are behind bars because they may have been abused or neglected as youth, and then that manifests as violence when they're adults. And instead of dealing with those problems at the root, instead of dealing with poverty, instead of dealing with mental health or addiction or our own racism, we shut that away. We literally incarcerate it away, cage it away, and those problems fester, as anything caged does. And so then we see, like currently, a third of the people that are in prisons right now across the country are not there for new law violations, they're there for technical violations of their probation or parole, which means that they didn't actually break another law. They might have not shown up for, you know, a meeting with their probation officer. They might have, you know, had a hot urinalysis test that tested positive for alcohol or for marijuana or something, and so people go back to prison. And so a lot of people are actually there not necessarily because they're committing more crimes, but because they're not doing whatever the criminal justice system wants them to do. And we also see, you know, Roya mentioned the private prison industry. It's not just the private prison industry, because they're not just in prisons anymore. Those companies are now buying up what's called the alternatives to detention. So piss testing, the ankle monitors, ankle bracelets, those kinds of things. Those are actually being those companies, which were, for the most part, smaller companies, locally owned, were bought up by many of these large private prison corporations because they actually saw a couple of years ago a slight drop-off in the number, in the incarceration rates around the country. And so they started buying into that industry, and actually Behavioral Industries, which was a Boulder-based industry, was just bought by Geo Corporation about 2 years ago. Geo Corporation also has the Immigration Detention Center that's here in Aurora that houses a couple thousand immigrants. So there's a lot of aspects to this. We could also think about this in a way, so you know, if you look at, imagine like a pie chart of the reasons why people are behind bars, either in jail or prison or immigration detention, whatever it is. You know, poverty or fear of poverty, addiction, mental health, immigration, abuse and neglect that manifests as violence. There are solutions to all of those problems that don't include caging people. And so as an organization, what we're trying to do, kind of our model, is to, first of all, connect all of the organizations that are working explicitly on mass incarceration issues, but then also to strengthen those sorts of vital services that would basically cut people off from getting there in the first place. So supporting organizations like Jobs with Justice that do workers' rights and labor rights so that people can actually, earn a decent living and therefore not, for example, sell drugs or rob folks, or basically stopping crime before it happens by creating social safety nets. So we're not explicitly an abolitionist organization, but if you look at the reasons why people are in prison, you could basically, rewind from that, figure out what the problem was. The answer is never cage that person. So that's kind of how we look at it. We started about 1.5 years ago. Basically, there were a whole bunch of organizations that me and a couple of other folks had grown some relationships with that were working on mass incarceration or the private prison issue, and realized that a number of these organizations just weren't talking to each other. And so basically that's why we started. We did not mean to begin an organization. We kind of just wanted to call a meeting and get people around the table. It was kind of like, what would happen if we got all these people around the same table? That meeting went really well. That was in March of 2013. And basically they asked us to continue holding that space. And so that's pretty much what we've been trying to do. At this point, we've expanded quite a bit. There are now quite a few more organizations that are in our network. And we basically try and help publicize all of the projects, the campaigns, the events that all of these different organizations are doing. If they have job opportunities, volunteer opportunities, they need help on something, we can help find volunteers or folks for them. We also, we meet with folks who are kind of new to the movement, or might not be new to the movement, but maybe new to sort of like the arena here, and kind of help them get lay of the land as far as what are the organizations doing what, and then help get them in contact so that they can sort of, work where they see their passion fitting best. And then try and hold spaces for organizations to come together. And where the infrastructure that's created by the organizations that already exists kind of falls short, we try and create space for the projects and campaigns that won't fit into those organizations as they stand currently. So we have kind of 2.5 campaigns that are up and running at the moment. One of them is on Ban the Box campaign, basically. It's called the Fair Chance campaign. If I say ban the box, are people familiar with that? Do you know what I'm talking about?
No.
Okay. So the box to be banned is that box on, who's applied for a job in the last year? Well, you were all very lucky. Okay, there you go. Was there a box on the job application asking if you had a criminal history or you ever been arrested, or? So that's the box. You'll also find those boxes on housing applications, applications to institutions of higher learning, and so what we know from years of research is that those boxes have 2 primary effects. One is that it totally discourages people from applying in the first place. And second of all, when they do apply, they almost certainly get put immediately into the reject pile without so much of an explanation as to why or what that person might have done. And some of the boxes just say, check here if you have a criminal history. And people are like, oh gosh, well I got that warning from that cop one time and I was really scared and I don't know if there's a record and who really knows, and I just better check the box just to be safe because I don't want to lie. A lot of people don't even know what a criminal history is, and actually there isn't really a legal definition of it, and so those boxes can be bad in many different kinds of ways. Because racism and white supremacy sort of permeates all of this, that also has a huge disproportionate impact on people of color as well. And so basically about 10 years ago, an organization called All of Us or None out of San Antonio, Texas, started the first Ban the Box campaign. They were so successful in their Ban the Box campaign that they now have a small fleet of formerly incarcerated people who are getting elected to local positions of decision-making authority because of how successful their Ban the Box campaign, because it was so widespread and so well done. There are now Ban the Box campaigns in over 30 states across the country, and actually we've already had a successful Ban the Box campaign here in Colorado. Back in 2012, Claire Levy ran a bill. So now, and it was successful. Now, if you apply to a job to the state of Colorado, there will not be a box on your application. So basically, woohoo! So what we're trying to do is, at the moment, we're targeting the private sector, primarily employers and housing providers, to ban the box. We're going to be using that base of people that then sign the pledge to ban the box as sort of a jumping off point to push ban the box on a municipal level in Denver and Aurora. And we're also, it's not in totally private because we're also going to be pressuring most likely the Denver Housing Authority and some of the other local housing authorities that do not have particularly good policies. So that's kind of the Fair Chance campaign. Before I go on, does anybody have any questions about that or CUAMI or anything else? Yes?
Are you looking at that with universities as well?
At this point, we're not.
Okay.
However, Tuesday, January 27th, I think it's 6:30 or 7 o'clock. I can check my phone and let you know afterwards. We're going to be having a meeting at the offices of Together Colorado. And that is going to bring together all the folks who have had any kind of like relation to the Ban the Box campaign at all. We trained about 30 people to collect pledges. We're basically going to be doing sort of a strategic planning session for 2015 to figure out where we want to go and what our goals are. And so if that's something that's a priority for you or other folks are feeling like that's important, particularly the people that are most directly impacted by these issues, then you know, we can talk about it there and that can become part of our priorities. We're a non-hierarchical organization. We do not, you know, nobody has any more like authority say so over anybody else. And so it's really a matter of who's willing to put in the time and what the greatest needs are for the people that are directly impacted. So that's basically how it happened. And actually the Fair Chance campaign grew out of a collaborative effort between Together Colorado, Jobs with Justice, and 9 to 5 Colorado, along with CUAMI. And that was really the first campaign that we had, and that was kind of the first moment that it was like, hey, this works, because look now, basically a bunch of organizations were thinking about doing a Ban the Box campaign, didn't think that they had the capacity to do it on their own, and so hadn't done it yet, but because I've been sticking my nose in everybody's business, found out that that it was all on their wish list. Put everybody in a room for a meeting, and now we have a Ban the Box campaign. So, and that's really why the coalition exists. So, before I go on, any more questions on that or comments maybe, or?
Can you repeat the name of the, you said Jobs for Justice, and what was the other one?
Yeah, Jobs with Justice, Together Colorado, and Colorado's chapter of 9 to 5, along with CUAMI. Just full disclosure, 9 to 5 does not currently feel like they have the capacity to put in a bunch of time on it, so they're less active on it, but still very much endorsing it, and so, you know, moving forward based on the capacity that they have at this time. So.
I didn't know you guys did that. That's awesome about the box, because I know from past that if you mark that box, you're screwed. I mean, you're totally screwed, and they don't even care about an explanation or anything.
Right.
So that's awesome.
Yeah, and I mean, you know, it means a lot of good people are getting passed up, and people are not defined by the worst thing that they ever did. Not to mention that a lot of those people get convictions for things that they didn't even do in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Exactly.
Okay, so that's the Fair Chance campaign. I'll give you sort of the rundown on the rest of the two campaigns, and then hopefully we'll get to hear more from you guys and less from me. So the other sort of like big campaign that we have up and running right now is called the Policing the Police Task Force. That is also a collaborative joint effort between us, an organization called Coloradans for Justice, and a number of random individuals who have come about. So Policing the Police Task Force started really back when things in Ferguson exploded. There was also an explosion of activity and solidarity here locally, and a lot of that actually was spearheaded by folks who had never been politically active, really, and didn't necessarily know what to do other than that they had a lot of rage, pain, suffering, all these different kinds of emotions that needed to get expressed, and a lot of that came out in protest. After those, actually two of sort of the biggest protests that were organized in solidarity with Ferguson were organized by people who had no experience political organizing, no experience with community organizing, and frankly were like, help, we don't know what to do. So they came to us and asked for some help sort of creating a way to turn this energy into action, knowing that there are huge problems with police accountability here in Denver. So basically, we helped them to organize a community forum that happened back in September. That forum drew over 100 people. It was at a church in 5 Points. And there was, at the end of the event, there was mass consensus among the whole group that people basically wanted to see an independent agency in charge of police accountability in this city, because the mechanisms that we have right now, frankly, don't work. The police, police accountability is up to the police themselves, and frankly, they can't be trusted. They need some more oversight, and we have the Office of the Independent Monitor, which is supposed to oversee them. He is, they're withholding reports from him, so he can't even get all the reports that he needs. But even if he does, he doesn't have his own investigative staff, so he can't do his own investigations. He has to rely on the investigations done by the Internal Affairs Department, which is within the police department and the sheriff's departments themselves. And then we have, and then even then, when he gets those reports, all he can do is make recommendations about what should be done. So he really has no teeth. And frankly, he's a pretty good guy. He is ostensibly on our side. However, he's kind of between a rock and a hard place. And then we've got the Citizens Oversight Board, which oversees the Office of the Independent Monitor. And none of them really can do much of anything. So basically, coming out of that meeting, people decided that they wanted this independent agency that would have the power to investigate complaints against officers and discipline those officers. And so that's basically what the police and the police task force is charged with at this moment. What we've been doing primarily is a bunch of research on what other models look like in other cities, trying to figure out what works for them, what isn't working, and then also talking to a number of the sort of like big kind of players in this city that understand city politics and that can, help us figure out what the best way to go about this is strategy-wise. And then also the sort of the third piece of that research aspect to it is that we're holding community forums. We want this initiative to be as reflective of the community's needs as possible. So basically, we have, so this Tuesday, this coming in 2 days, we have our first of a series of community forums that's going to be at the Mile High Youth Corps at 6:30 on Tuesday evening. And basically what we're trying to do is get as much feedback from the community as possible. We have kind of a working idea of what this initiative should look like, but we need to know better what people really need. Also, because essentially this would require a change to the city charter, we're gonna have to it's gonna have to be put on a ballot. So this is a huge, huge deal. We're gonna need as many hands on deck as possible because we're likely gonna need to get a bunch of signatures to even get it on the ballot in the first place. So a couple thousand signatures, we need a couple hundred people to help us collect those signatures. Not to mention actually campaigning for it, making sure that it gets passed because we're going up against the police union, which is huge and powerful and angry all the time. So. So basically, that's what we're doing. Also, because this is essentially, this body, if it got passed, would be a disciplinary body, we could roll into it other types of things that we want to see from our police department, like, for example, required mental health screenings monthly, or counseling weekly, or, testing for steroids and amphetamines, or all sorts of things. We could roll into this because it's a disciplinary policy. If they're not, if the police are not doing what we say, then this body could be in charge of disciplining them. Therefore, we could roll into a whole bunch of stuff into this policy. So we're trying to figure out what among all those different things people want us to prioritize, what they feel would be most useful, and including that in the language of the initiative that we actually sort of run. But we want to make sure that that's not just like our, crackpot idea of what would be awesome, but actually is what reflected in what people really want and what they would vote for. So that's what the Police and the Police Task Force is up to at the moment. And then our last kind of, it's not so much of a campaign as it is a research project at this point. Has anybody heard of Community Corrections?
Corporation of America?
Community Corrections. No. You're thinking of Corrections Corporation of America, which is one of the major private prison industries,
right,
which is kind of a totally different beast, although oddly, not that different. Community Corrections is kind of, has anybody heard of a halfway house?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so people know what halfway houses are. Community Corrections is basically the halfway house system in Colorado. And actually, it's all over the country as well, but because they're state-run systems, it's, I'm really referring to the Colorado state system. Community Corrections has a couple of facilities that are state-run. Almost all of the rest of them are all privately run. It's a huge problem because basically so like for example, Corrections Corporation of America, GEO Group, these organizations, these corporations that run the private prisons have subsidiaries that run the community corrections facilities. So they have, first of all, no incentive to pass people successfully out through the program. They have more incentive to send them back to prison because they make more money when they're in prison. But also, there's very little oversight in these community corrections facilities. A lot of people are, they're getting grieved, and once you get a certain number of grievances, you get sent back to prison. They'll get grieved for something like not washing their sheets weekly, but they don't give you soap to wash your sheets, they don't give you help finding a job, and they'll basically just grieve you even if you literally can't buy the soap. You also, I didn't know this, couldn't get Medicaid while you're in community corrections because they have their own health plan within community corrections, except that their health plan means that you don't get pretty much all the stuff that you really need, and so people are getting grieved for being on Medicaid while they're in community corrections. There's a huge host of problems, not to mention, like, because they're private programs, the training for the staff doesn't necessarily have to be up to a certain level, so much so as it would be if it was a state-run program. And so, the staff often have their own issues, and they're underpaid and overworked. So community corrections is a very broken system. When you look at the number of people that are actually going back to prison from community corrections facilities, when the community corrections facility is supposed to be their transition out of supervision, you can see that there's a problem, but it's hard to see where. Like, the state collects data on how many people are getting sent back, but they don't collect data on why, or like what's really going on in there. So basically, this research project is a collaborative effort that we are basically trying to curate between a number of academics and students who are familiar with sort of empirical evidence and gathering really good statistical data so that we can build the data to support policy change. It's hard to push policy change without the data to back up the fact that it needs to happen in the first place. So we're in this sort of like research phase of it. And we're going to be collaborating also with some of the local research engines, or at least trying to collaborate with them. Depends on whether or not we get approved. Basically, to do this, we have anecdotal evidence of how messed up it is, but not empirical data to show it. So, community corrections, policing the police, fair chance campaign, those are kind of the campaigns that we're doing right now. But other than that, we really try and create space for these kinds of projects and campaigns that don't necessarily fit into the other organizations that already exist or that they may not have the capacity for. Granted, we don't have any money, but because we're aligned with organizations that do super grass top type stuff like policy and advocacy, lobbying type stuff, all the way down to the more grassroots level kind of work, we're able to, even if we can't do it as an organization, we can connect folks with the people who could make that happen for them. So that's basically what we try and do. And in April, we're going to be having our first roundtable to bring together all the community members that are interested in this stuff and all of the organizations that are doing this work so that they can hear it, you know, from the horse's mouth, what they're doing, how to get involved. Hopefully big potluck style, it'll be massive, and I'm really looking forward to it. But yeah, questions, comments, smiles, I'll take it all.
About the community corrections and that, I violated my probation like twice, being arrested for protesting, being targeted, but they wouldn't even accept me on community corrections because of mental health issues, because I'm under mental health care because of severe depression, and so I take medication for severe depression. Community corrections would not even allow me to go there. My only option was to go to prison, and if I violate again, and they denied me on those reasons, and so they don't even give you a chance with mental health, usually most of the time.
There's lots of folks, I mean, so I interned with the public defender for a couple of years when I was in law school, and we would get lists every week of the people who had been approved for community corrections. Most of the people would not make it onto that list. So, I mean, I think that speaks volumes, first of all, to the people that are getting sent to prison in the first place, and whatever may be afflicting them that community corrections isn't qualified to handle. But then also that we don't have the infrastructure to create the kind of, community-based solutions that people need. That's what community corrections was originally envisioned as a way to keep people embedded within the community, but sort of growing and continuing to rehabilitate, except that that's not what happens there. People, if they need job training or any kind of assistance like that, they're not getting it. Most facilities, they won't get it at least, and certainly not at the private ones. And then they each have their own different disciplinary policies, and goodness knows if they're even following that. So the survey that we have that's working is like 15 pages at the moment. So for the people who are actually going to be filling out this survey, it'll be long, but it's important.
Yeah, I've known a lot of people, or quite a few people that don't make it through community corrections. They just go right back to prison, and they know they're going to, really.
Right.
So.
Right. It's estimated that a little bit more than half of people that go into community corrections don't successfully pass through. So it's a failure. I mean, more than half, I saw this hand first, then go to Rhea.
I run an ex-offender program for reentry here in the neighborhood. My question, if we're talking about ending mass incarceration, and we really want to think upstream about it, what would be one or two of the biggest levers that would actually empty half of the prison? And what would it take to get that passed, in your opinion and your experience?
In my opinion, I don't think there's one or two things. I think there's more like maybe half a dozen, which would each have different component parts as well. So I don't know if you were here in the very beginning, but basically the way that we envision mass incarceration, think of a pie chart. Sorry for those of you who heard this already, but basically why people are in prison. We've got crimes of poverty or fear of poverty, addiction that goes untreated, mental health issues that go untreated, abuse and neglect as children that is manifested in violence as adults, and then a whole bunch of people that are there because we have a racist immigration system. And so all of those things are what is, and also if you add into that, like for example, most domestic violence crimes, some of those are based on the pressures that poverty creates, but a lot of those are created based on traditional notions of patriarchy that allow this kind of violence against women to be perpetrated. So I think that first of all, we would need an overhaul in the education system so that people would understand racism, sexism, homophobia, classism, these things at a more fundamental level, so that when people are acting out, they can see that for what it is and call it out in their own neighbors and their own communities and have more accountability just within their own, community. I think that's part of it, so I think it includes an education system. I think there needs to be a massive overhaul in our economy, frankly, because our economy is not situated to produce enough jobs and well-paying jobs that people are comfortable and comfortably out of poverty. Poverty creates much of this as well. And I think also we need to strengthen community support systems so that when people do become abusers or people abuse other people, there can be those similar kinds of that infrastructure in the community. And a lot of people think of this as sort of restorative justice or transformative justice that basically creates accountability within folks without actually sending them when, for example, they act out in violence. So I think that we need community-based transformative justice models, restorative justice models, and I can talk about that as well if folks aren't familiar with that. We need an overhaul in the immigration system as well. I mean, frankly, we need a pathway to citizenship that doesn't exist. And I think it's a lot of these things coming together. We also need to be able as a society to talk about racism and how it permeates our society. Otherwise, we can do all that we want to try and fix the police accountability mechanisms all over the country, but we can't stop the violence from happening. We can only hold people accountable afterwards, or at least try to hold them accountable afterwards. So I think that people understanding racism at a more fundamental level would be helpful for that. And I bet that, I'm as a white person, I'm not directly impacted by most of these issues, or as directly impacted by most of these issues, as are people of color, as are people without homes, as are people that are more working class than I am. So those folks would actually be better situated to tell you what those solutions would be.
Can I just go, basically said change the economy, change the education system, change our communities, which to me seem like, yeah, but we were here 50 years ago talking in those broad terms. But like if 80% of incarceration happens because of drug and alcohol related offenses, the legalization of weed helped keep a lot of people from getting thrown into prison, right? Decriminalizing cocaine or something like that. I'm just saying, I don't know if we're ever going to see this perfect place come, this community come. And we should all work on that, but are there targeted things that we can do to say 10 guys were going to prison last year and now 6.5 are? We're solving mass incarceration because of policy change in a very targeted, laser-like way.
I agree. I mean, I think I didn't mention that because that seemed like the obvious answer to me. Like, obviously, decriminalize drugs. You know what I mean? Like, that's one of those, like, well, of course, at least in my head. So I didn't think to say it because I think that, there's about 500,000 people that are in right now for, basically drug possession. That is actually a small portion of our prison population. There's a much bigger, I mean, that's like one piece of the pie. And certainly that would help out a lot, but that doesn't fix the problem. Legalization of all of these different things is not a long-term fix, it's a short-term fix. But if you want to think long-term, I think we need to be thinking more fundamentally about the systems that rule our lives. Yes, Roy.
You talked about the system of economy, like finding jobs for this, but also you need to create a system of economy to de-job all these people who make money off of these prisons. Canyon City, if they close out the prisons and half of the prisoners get out, that town goes to hell. They cannot survive. How do you get those addictions off of people? People are addicted to that kind of money, and to me is just so cold-blooded. These people are making money off of these people who go to prison, and as you say, many of them are drug-related. I prefer to have a treatment centers for them and spend the money that way, my tax money on that way, than having them in prison, So, as I was reading the new Jim Crow, it was talking about all these people who are living off of this. It's not just private prison. the whole town, the whole economy, people who make gadgets, people who make food for prisons and stuff like that. How do we get them off of this addiction?
Yeah.
That they shouldn't be making money off of this.
Absolutely. I mean, I think there's a couple of ways to answer that. So one is that there was a time that town existed before that private prison existed. Those people were probably farming, or they were doing their own kinds of, had their own industries. And then when the private prisons came in, it was like, well, now we can go to the grocery store as opposed to growing our own food. Now we can do all of this. We just need to get a job at the private prison. They're hiring everybody. So I think part of it is maybe getting people back to that. Another aspect is there's plenty of industry, alternative energy, maybe just as an example, plenty of kinds of industry that need more infrastructure that doesn't exist at this point. Those facilities don't have to be torn down. They could be repurposed to create alternative energy. And that's just an example. I mean, what other kinds of things do people need that we don't have access to? For example, treatment services. We could create warehouses of treatment providers.
Residences.
There's all different sorts of ways that those things could be repurposed, or people could reimagine, what needs to happen there. And I agree with you, it is a huge problem, and so CUAMI actually started, before we were CUAMI, that first meeting that we had where we brought everybody together because we were like, maybe that's a good idea, was actually focused on the private prison issue. Because there's private prison right here, there's actually 4 private prisons in Colorado, and so we were trying to figure out why aren't these organizations talking to one another and combining forces around this privatization problem. The reason that CUAMI went to mass incarceration was because it became clear that people wanted to focus on something more broad than that. But what we have there, what we were originally thinking of doing was, let's bring all of the organizations that are fighting private prisons and the people in renewable energy together and figure out how we can repurpose those facilities into basically, warehouses creating alternative energy. So, I mean, it's an idea, it just needs implementation. Yeah.
And so I'm going to suggest, that is happening. And really I think it's a layered issue. And I come from profit and loss. I'm a veteran of the Gulf War. I went straight into aerospace. So I knew my job relied on us waging war, quite frankly. And so there's some internal conflicts about that. There are social conflicts about that. And so now when you have a conversation about a Bent County, where Fort Lyon used to be a correctional facility, and you have a single large employer, so we'll get away from the compassion part of it and say, oh my God, it's a prison, But it was a single large employer for a segment of the population who are undereducated. It has been the case for 3 and 4 generations. They have been reliant on it. And so they haven't quite figured out how to navigate in what is the dog-eat-dog capitalistic society that says, I got to fill out the application, here's hoping the block's not on it, I know I need this kind of education, this is how I become the go-getter. They don't have that. And I don't mean that to be derogatory, they literally don't have it. And so before that property was turned over to the Department of Corrections, it belonged to the VA. And we sent our disenfranchised veterans there, folks with mental health issues and those that we knew weren't going to be a part of the overall population. Well, that stopped being popular, right? We were sending our veterans at a time that we were having 2 wars into this remote spot for treatment. It didn't look good, right? And so the property got turned over. They went from a large single employer for 93 years in the VA hospital. To your point, the entire supply chain within 3 counties was reliant on that being a mental health hospital. So if you were making widgets for the kitchen, widgets for the bed, widgets for the padded room, then you got to keep your job. Well, now that was going away because it wasn't popular. We turned it over to the DOC, and someone made a decision, like it or not, that it wasn't profitable enough. There are double-digit profit margins in private prison industry. So to answer the question is, how do we make this change? somebody's got to have a conversation with these folks who are making double-digit profit margins on how they're going to replace that. This is why the insurance industry fought the Affordable Care Act. Until you tell somebody how I get to keep making money in the way that I know how to make money, then I'm going to fight everything you do that looks like a threat to my not being able to make money. And so that is a conversation we also have to have with people in community, private sector. I was approached to participate in discussion about Fort Lyon. I don't have a nonprofit. At that time I was actually a homeless veteran, and I'm quite sure that they only asked me because I was a homeless veteran, and they were looking to focus that property on supporting housing for homeless veterans because the president just signed a directive. I don't think they knew what they got when they got me. Now they have me, and they can't do anything about it. And so what is happening on Fort Lyon is that my concern had been all along is that there are probably going to be people who want to see, the people who live there, not policymakers, not wealthy prison owners, but the people who live and work there who don't understand where their livelihood is going to come from. They're going to be the ones to push back. They're going to be the first ones to push back. And so the conversation, at least I wanted to have, was like, well, how do we create sustainability for a program that I know is going to be pushed back in a community that can't figure out where they fit in this whole new big thing we're trying to do? And the answer is to bring them in and include them. The answer is to break the single large employer model in these rural areas. They can't fight the prison coming in. They don't have the education to do it. They don't have the money to do it. They can't fight it. So it's actually put upon them, and we've created a culture of single large employer where we have to dehumanize the pipeline in order for me to feel good about getting in my car every day and going there and working. And so how do you change that culture? How do you change that mindset? How do you change those hearts? It turns out it's a very long process, right? And so the discussion I had and in testimony with Senate, because it's the right thing to do, we want to do the veterans, and they couldn't get the money. Couldn't get the money to do it. They had to do an earmark and some really unfortunate legislation for it to be in. And so now my concern is how do we keep it in after the 3 years of guaranteed funding go away? That looks like bringing those folks in and helping them understand that they can create their own small business there, that they can create their own supply chain there, that if you're serving veterans in this place, then the veterans within the counties should come together. There are actually laws that support veteran-owned small business. And so educate those towns on what their other options are. A lot of overhead in that, a lot of energy in that. You're not going to do it unless you pull in Faith Community. They have all the money. I say this wherever I go. Faith Community's got plenty of money. Not having this conversation about mass incarceration. Private sector, if you can show me how I can still make my money, I'm down for whatever you want to do. And they've got things in place, diversity and community involvement, and a lot of their tax benefits are tied to their ability to fold into community. They can write $5,000 checks, discretion. I could write $5,000 checks when I worked in aerospace and nobody asked me what I was spending it on. I could just say it's community involvement. And so until we start having those kinds of discussions with the folks who have been convinced, if you've read the same book I read, if I can convince a rural, lower white class that this is the only way they get to make a living, and we've got a body of folks who are less than human, who have a propensity for violence and drugs and all of this kind of thing, then I can make them feel okay about working. And so that, 4 generations of that. And so it's not a presto poof, here are the 6 levers, let's keep it moving. It is a mosaic of activity that has to happen that not everyone is committed to who has money, skin, and interest in the game. Faith has plenty of money. We're running around trying to figure out who needs to pay for things. They have plenty of money. And I don't care what your faith is. You've got money. You've got the biggest church in the Colorado, whatever it is, the mosque, the money is there. And even, and I'm going to say it, even if you just want to take care of the people who believe like you do, or even if you just want to take care of the people who look like you do, then do that. And then the problem gets solved. And so, you know, it's there's a model out there, we're crumpling along. I see it as a 20-year vocation. That's what I'm called to do for the next 20 years, is figure out how to help these people. I went from, in 18 months, and this is the truth, I went from, in 18 months' time, as the black girl from Denver that just keeps showing up, to having a name, to them knowing that I'm on their side, to them knowing that I'm committed, to them helping these 4 generations make, and that was even the veteran community, the civilian community. She's back, here she comes, all right. That's after we did the right thing, we had the ribbon cutting, we had the parade, we did the pedal through the planes out, kind of got it on the radar. Those folks all pulled out of there like a big sucking sound. And that is exactly what those residents expected and was saying the whole time. You're gonna come in here, you're gonna upset our lives, we're gonna lose our jobs, and then you're gonna leave without any other solution for us to make our living. And they were ag. No one was having the conversation with them over STEM as it relates to ag, science, technology, engineering, and math. There's a young group, 18 to 24, that are headed this way and are homeless now, who love to play video games. Turns out there's some technology, they can actually run a robot like a video game and manage the farm. But no one's there saying, this is how you do that. You take the 566 acres, the 34 plus buildings, and you repurpose it for a residential treatment program, which is what the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless has done. So they have the black box. Right now they have the financing for 3 years. But eventually the people are gonna come out of the black box. And they're either gonna stay or they're gonna come back home. And until we answer how you come back home, how you make a living at a livable wage, in Colorado that's $17 an hour if you have no dependents. It's $23 an hour if you do. That's the number. That's our economy in Colorado. But what we've done is create, I call it a tier of poverty. We have created an industry out of poverty. So if I stand up a nonprofit, or even if I'm Volunteers of America or United Way, the government is going to fund me to do rehabilitation and job training, and I need to figure out how to get employers to hire folks who might have to check the block that I don't really, that you don't want to check. And then we're going to just catapult them into a $12 an hour job. We've decided that this is what they're capable of, and that's it. $12 an hour. So that is less, as it turns out, than the livable wage. So they're still going to need some other kind of services, and so the government then pays another nonprofit maybe to give them these other services, or SNAP, which they're trying to cut, or Medicaid, which they're trying to cut. And so, and stick to that single large employer model where they can. And so I don't have all the answers. I know where I'm vectored in and what I'd like to see happen. Because as a woman of faith, we are promised a future and a hope. And it's not just those. When I look at the folks who live in the 3 counties, this is when I start getting emotional. This is all they've known. They don't have a future and a hope. If you take their single large employer away from them, as much as it is evil, then they then lose their future and hope. And so what do you have to do to replace that, have that conversation? And you have to have it with the people who have the money, and that's private sector, and that's faith. And I don't know what level of courage, I don't know what, it's a case by case. I know what conversation I have to have with specific people that I'm talking to at the time. It's not the same conversation. I can't show up with a sheet that says, here are the stats. I know that it costs $43,000 for a homeless person to be homeless, and it's $17,000 if you house them. Okay. Okay, now what? Because no one's asked me to go in my pocket and pull out the delta. No one's asked me to do that. But what they have done is scratch my fear itch, or they scratch my whatever itch, and I've been put in a place where I need this job. I need this job. So I need them to go to jail. Period. I just need them all to go to jail. And so for 18 months, and this is the truth, how do you have that conversation with a 63-year-old who was just about to get to retirement? You pull up the single large employer You come in with your parade and you leave. That guy is hard to turn. But it's heart to heart, it's humanity. We have to do it. And organizations, as it turns out, are comprised of a bunch of human beings like us. So we have an organization that has a culture, and then our neighbor we know works where. Or our cousin or our sister we know works where. So we have that conversation. Dude, what's going on over there? What are you guys doing? Can we have a conversation with folks coming on at Excel and not having to worry about that block? $17 an hour is the number. You know that those who are leading in the poverty industry are going to fight that. I get fought on that all the time. I get the call that says, will you come help us do a job panel? No, because you're talking $12 an hour. You're talking $14 an hour. I want to talk to you about how do you create opportunity around livable wage. And to your point, I'm sorry about my timeliness. I did not resolve to be on time to anything this year. And Darren knows I'm going to get here eventually. The 566 acres, we've got 2 organizations who are interested in having the energy discussion. How do we get this land? How do we, when you have water rights, when you have primary rights, and this is not, people in counties that have had jails thrust upon them, they're not thinking along those terms. What are my natural resources? What is our ability to make money here? We don't need this prison, we can go this way. They don't know to have that conversation, but they're having it now in Benton County after 103 years. And so it's not going to be a one and done. It's like we all kind of have to put our shoulder to the grindstone, get locked and loaded where we have passion, and clearly that's where my passion is. And not be afraid to have that discussion with people we know who work in these places, who insist that we check blocks where we work potentially, that are insisting on these things. And there's a reason why we don't, because our own comfort is a little prickly to do that. It is. It's oh God, it's hard. But until we're willing to do that, until we get the courage to do that, where we are, where we have influence, it doesn't matter. And I say this with love and compassion for the effort, because I love people who just want to go do the damn thing. I'm not even kidding. But this kind of thing, until we take the personal responsibility where we are and have influence, this won't work. We'll just keep having meetings. It's precisely why I say no to a lot of these things. So I'm disclosing something that some folks in the room didn't know. But because I know that it starts here, in the courage within us, then we come together. Say, here's how we're going to go do it. So until that happens, we're spinning our wheels. But the key is to let the private prison industry know how else they can make up a 37% profit margin. And that is a tall order. That's a tall order. Well, listen, can't you do it? It looks like maybe pot can happen.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's figure that out. But you have to tell them that. You have to tell them that. And Congress is that's sanctioned insider trading. So if I know if I'm going to I'm changing laws, right? I'm thinking, how's that going to affect my portfolio? And that's not an indictment on anyone who serves. It isn't. But you would be inhuman, if you weren't thinking, how does that affect me if we do that? And so it's a lot of moving parts. I see the same faces I see, man, waving the bat. But it takes all of us from within our comfort zone, culturally. It takes it professionally. There's a lot at stake if you stand up and say, this isn't proper. We're not good community partners as this business.
Well, let's run
I'm sorry.
I think there's also a couple of other dimensions to that too, which is that, for one thing, private prisons, they wouldn't necessarily if they didn't have the investment money that they have. So there's actually an organization called Enlace that we're a local, not necessarily a chapter of, but an affiliate of, that has a private prison divestment campaign, which is trying to get big money out of the private prisons. Frankly, I don't care where their 37%
Yeah,
profit margin comes
exactly.
from, and you know,
This is
they're
capitalism.
gonna fight
This
it.
is
They're gonna fight it either way, and whatever they try and go into instead, they're gonna do it in a bad way. And so, I'm a lot more interested in bankrupting them and letting them go on their merry way, than actually, you know, being concerned for their well-being, because they're ruining lives for a living, for more than a living. But then the other aspect of it is that, so like, private prisons don't have to live up to the same requirements that state facilities do. For example, you know, the minimum wage that's paid, the unions that the state prison guards get. Those, the private prison guards, they don't get to unionize, at least not with the state employees. They get paid less, they have fewer benefits, they'll work 30, 35 hours that they're not required to give them benefits, and it's because they don't actually contract with the state to open a facility, they contract with a local municipality. And so, excuse me, so they're not required to live up to all of these other expectations. They're not required to have GED opportunities in the facilities. They don't have to have all of these different kinds of mental health resources in the facilities, because they don't have to live up to those expectations. So I think, you know, something that's concrete that could happen in the short term now is that there could be a state law that basically requires private prison industries to contract directly with the state, if they contract with them at all, as opposed to contracting with a municipality, which those municipalities are not going to have the kinds of regulations the state will, because they don't already have facilities. They just don't have them. So that's one concrete thing that could happen. But I saw a hand over here, so I want to go to you as well.
I introduce myself. My name is Greg Duran, and I will confess that I'm a serial testifier. Okay, there's not a meeting, not a hearing that I'm afraid of to go through. And one of the things that we need help with is we need to make sure that everybody understands when this legislation comes up, because it comes up fast and it comes up hard. And I'll give you one example that happened last year. We call it the Whizzinator Bill. The Whizzinator Bill came up, and it was sponsored by McNulty and King, and they were going to get it through, and it was a $5,000 fine and a felony if you used any kind of system to fool a drug test. Okay, you use a Whizzinator and it was a felony. Okay, and that nobody showed up for that to testify against it. It was ready to get through, and then we were asked to come and we testified against it, and we eventually ended up killing it, because the problem is it turns up into a circle where people that can't pay the fine end up in jail, and they end up using it. So what we end up is these bills that come up and they stack on each other. The one thing that I would say that would empty half the prisons is going to be mental health care, and the people need mental health care to get out of the prisons. You talk to the people that are running these jails, the jailers, they say that 60 to 80% of the people in their jail have a mental ill issues. Okay, we need to take them out of there, and we need to use the prisons like they are. I have a lot of experience with repurposing prisons. I did the action with my wife in a group as consultants to turn that prison over in Brush. Okay, we went up against the city council in Brush to do the zoning. We had the prison, they had the property, and we got beat up so bad because the community is exactly what you said. They wanted the prison back, and that's the only thing they were going to go for, because the prison was jobs for everybody in the town. We were trying to change the zoning to allow us to grow marijuana in that field for federal. Anyway, it's a long thing. The town turned us down. We couldn't do it, okay? They basically extended the ban. What I'm talking about is people showing up to action. When these things come up, the hearings about the Fort Lyons, we need more people to come who understood this to come and testify and say, this is what I believe as a citizen. We can do all the organizations, but until we start showing up, and protesting is great. I love protesting. I mean, it has a place, but we need to walk in the doors, put our suits in, and we need to sit down, and we need to speak our piece, because we're missing a big piece. I've been working on marijuana legislation for years with my wife for Reasonable, and we get beat up. I'll do it, and I did it for years, and I always say my biggest problem is law enforcement lobbyists. okay? And I did it for years. We fought the DUID, the legalization, Amendment 20, and I will double down on that now with law enforcement. The law enforcement lobbies are twice as strong and twice as mad right now, and they're coming hard. But we have to come back, and we have to come with people who are reasonable and understand this, come with facts, and we have to ask for data and more data and more data. You don't even track the marijuana arrest and how many people. And the other thing that I would do is I would remove probable cause of the smell of marijuana from anything. Cops should not be allowed to use probable cause because they whined about what are we going to do with our dogs. Okay, that's what they came and they testified. What are we going to do with our marijuana dogs if we do that? All right. So these little tiny things, these nuances, we have to be aware. Who's enrolled and follows Legiscan? Who knows what Legiscan is?
Legiscan?
Legiscan. Every morning you wake up and you read your email and you look at Legiscan and you see what bills are coming up and what in hearing, and if you don't show up, we're going to get killed again when it comes to this stuff. And
Can
then
you share that stuff with me?
Yeah,
So that
yeah,
then
yeah. I mean, I'll get you
publicize
signed
it?
up. We're gonna do that, and you
I'm
guys.
not going to sign up for it. I want else to ask people about for when we're collecting signatures for the ballot initiative for the policing the police. You know that I don't determine the direction of the coalition. I don't determine what our work is. We respond to the needs of the community. So, you know, I could tell you about the things that I think that need to be worked on. As far as what those things are and how they should be prioritized, I am not an authority on that and would not pretend to be an authority on that, you know. So I think there could, you know, within this sort of system, we could talk about, we could talk about the problems in the Jeffco schools with the school board being all Tea Party. We could talk about, you know, there's almost an infinite number of issues that we could talk about. So what's next should be defined by the people that are most directly impacted by these issues. As a person who is not directly impacted, I would defer to the folks that are more impacted on that. And I think that when the time does come to do the ballot initiative, it may actually not be strategic to do it that way. It may be that it is strategic to, you know, to have people, you know, collecting signatures for all sorts of things. But, you know, the other thing about this is that we don't just need people to sign, because then people also have to vote. And, you know, it could be in any of the elections, but, you know, people don't show up for midterms. So getting people out for that would be important. There's a number of different issues that might be going on that will be very relevant at that time. So, sorry, I don't really have very good answers to either of your questions.
It's okay.
Basically, yeah.
What do you think about before you fall asleep at night?
All of the things that I need to do the next morning, which is why I don't sleep very well.
Right. Thanks.
Any other questions? If there's no question, I wanted to remind everybody on February 1st, our social forum going to be on workers' cooperative, how to own and run our businesses, you know. And on March 1st, our social forum, I'm thinking about doing it on police brutality. So.
Speaking of which, there was one other announcement that I forgot to make. MLK Day is coming up, and as many of you probably already know, the MLK Parade in Colorado, in Denver, is a little bit watered down, to be delicate about it. Senator Cory Gardner will be speaking, for those of you who love him. I'm sure you're all in the room. There is a new organization that's recently been founded called the Denver Freedom Riders. And that really came out of a group of folks who got a bunch of money together and went to Ferguson to do support there, and have made a couple of trips to Ferguson and are coming here back to Denver and trying to figure out what to do here. And with MLK Day coming up, folks are really, really angry about the way that Martin Luther King is being misremembered or just not remembered at all. And his true legacy is really being watered down. And so they're basically really trying to sort of reactivate that space. You know, this is a parade, it's a march parade that draws about 30,000 people every year, and it's a very watered down space. Can you imagine if that entire 30,000 people were there for Black Lives Matter? So basically, what we're asking folks to do is that wear black, come to the MLK Parade, wear black that day. We're going to be doing a die-in. Alex Landau is here. Thanks for coming, Alex. And so we're going to be doing a die-in about a block from where he was attacked by police. After that, at 1 o'clock, after the parade is over, we're going to be holding a conference. It's a short conference. It goes from about 1 to 4:30, I think. It will most likely be at the McNichols building. If it's not, it'll be somewhere on Auraria campus. But if you get on the list that's being circulated, you will certainly be made aware of that. And that is basically Denver Freedom Riders present Black Lives Matter. And so there's going to be Know Your Rights trainings, both on police encounters and also Know Your Rights in protest situations. There's going to be panel discussions and different speakers on basically this whole movement and what's going on and where we're going next. And so it's just a lot of really good stuff that's going to be happening. There will be a lot of organizations that are going to be tabling. If you have a table, or if you have an organization that you want to table for while you're there, come and see me, and I'll make sure that you get on that list. But basically, it'd be really great to get everybody out for that, and we're really looking to try and change the discussion on MLK Day to something that actually matters. So, being that you're all here, I'm sure you all care. Yes?
I think it's great that Corey Gardner is coming. This is an opportunity to speak to him and demonstrate to him that people are interested. And we have to try to downplay confrontation, because that doesn't accomplish anything.
Yeah, that's a good point. There are a couple of folks in the Freedom Riders that are trying to figure out whether or not we should try and put pressure on his office to have him not speak at all there. It comes from Yuma. There's like 4 black people in Yuma. So the whole Black Lives Matter thing is not necessarily in his repertoire.
The state, so the state should let him know.
That's true.
And
people will let him know while they are there.
If you recall, in the new Jim Crow, she addresses over and over again the fact that when the movement first started, it was lower economic classes together. It was not black, white, Hispanic. So this speaks directly to what you were talking about. I mean, I have a nephew who isn't making $23 an hour to support his 2 kids, and if he had a chance to make that kind of a wage, I think he'd be much more open to some new ideas.
I agree with you. Does anybody else have any other announcements they would like to make? I know you're all involved in different things, so it'd be great to hear what else is going on, related or not.
Well, I'm not terribly active, but I'm with the American Defense Service Committee Program Committee, which is working on immigration reform, and it does overlap a lot with lots of issues.
Yes, they're partners of ours. Yes.
I'm Janet. I protest for the camping ban, and a lot of homeless people are going in our prison system. A lot for being homeless. I'm gonna cry because it's every Friday night, 5:30. I feed, and we protest. We could really use a lot of help.
Where at?
16th and Wine Coop in front of Chattercover. Thank you so much. Every Friday night. With food.
Lots of delicious food. Yes. Cool. Thank you guys for coming.
Thank you for putting this on.
Beautiful.